Thank you, Alex and group. I almost wore out my shoe. So it's Jazz Sunday again, and I am delighted. Thank you, Anna, for inviting me to preach on Jazz Sunday. It's not that I'm an expert on jazz, but I'm probably the only person here this morning who used to go to the Hi-Hat on Columbus Avenue in Boston, Boston's House of Jazz in the 1950s. My first time, I went in 1952. I was a freshman in college. Do the math. I went with my jazz mentor, a classmate, Phil White from Falmouth. Wonderful. We had a great meal. J.J. Johnson was performing with his trio. He's a terrific trombonist, was a terrific trombonist. And Billy Daniels was singing. Billy Daniels was an elegant, handsome African-American man. And he used to look so good, and he sang his signature song, and he used to put his hand up to his ear. That old black magic has me in its spell. It was a wonderful evening. Loved it. But why a Jazz Sunday? It's not in the liturgical calendar. You won't find it. It's not even America's favorite music. CBS did a poll back in January of 2018 and discovered that America's most popular music is country. Jazz came in next to last, just ahead of gospel. Interesting. We should probably have a country music Sunday, and I want you to know we could do it. I talked with Mark Anati recently. You all know Mark is an accomplished jazz musician, but perhaps you didn't know that for a whole year, Mark played the drums and did percussion for a country music band in North Carolina. Country and Western reminds me of the Blues Brothers. You remember what kind of music do you play? Both kinds, country and Western. I don't know much about country music. I mean, I love Johnny Cash and Garth Brooks, but the music always seems so simple to me. I wanted to learn more, so I watched Ken Burns' series on country music. 8 nights PBS, 16 hours on country music. It was fascinating. It really was as much about American history as about country music. And I learned something. I learned something important where I don't find the music all that interesting. One commentator said, country music is 3 chords and the truth. They had videos of some of the most famous artists. Dolly Parton. I mean, how can you not love Dolly Parton? She's so down to earth. She's so grounded. Barbara Walters interviewed Dolly Parton many years ago, and the last question was, how would you like people to think about you? What would you want people to say about you 100 years from now? Dolly Parton never blinked. She said, I'd like them to say, doesn't she look wonderful for her age? They played some videos of Dolly Parton hits. One of them was Jolene. You know? Jolene, 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 I'm begging you, please don't take my man because you can. I had that in my head for a week. I couldn't get Jolene to go away. The Wall Street Journal, in its review of the Ken Burns series, said that country is the song of America. I beg to differ some. With apologies to the Wall Street Journal, I believe that jazz and country and Western are the music of America. Jazz goes deeper into American history to a sorry time. A sorry time in the late 19th century when slaves, African slaves, were picking cotton, and they began to do the chants of their African homeland. The blues came into being in the Mississippi Delta and became a factor in the early 20th century. And then along came Louis Armstrong. And if you don't know anything about jazz, even today, I think you know about Louis Armstrong, Satchmo, Pops, with that big grin. And he made jazz the music of America in the 20s and 30s and beyond. Country goes back to the 20s and the 30s, the Depression and poverty, and it comes out of the Appalachian Hills and South and the Southwest. And it took hold of America, especially in the time of Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton and Garth Brooks. Jazz and country, the music of America. Now, Anna sent me a sweet email a little over a week ago. She asked how Shirley and I were feeling. Very nice, thank you. She wanted to confirm that I was still preaching on Jazz Sunday. And in one sentence, she said, as I mentioned before, I'm doing a series on family matters, the art of dealing with messy families. And you can preach on anything you want as long as it's on relationships. So, works well. It really does, because the jazz musicians and the country music stars all had messiness in families and inter-musical group conflict. Dolly Parton was born in a one-room shack in the hills of East Tennessee. She was the fourth child of 12, all living in this one room. They slept 3 to 4 to a bed, and Dolly says she got peed on often. She grew up in poverty. Her father was a sharecropper. She has appreciation for her mother and father, but when she became a performer, she had a mentor who helped her a great deal. And then she had conflict with her mentor, messiness with her mentor. Louis Armstrong was born in a one-room shack in New Orleans. His mother was 16 years old. His father abandoned the family almost instantly. His mother gave Louis to his grandmother to raise. Louis grew up in a part of New Orleans called the battlefield. He knew poverty and prejudice. So jazz musicians and country musicians knew a lot about relationship issues. Since I've already confessed about my origin, in 1959, I was a graduate student at Boston University, and I took a course in the Human Relations Center. And the course was a pro-seminar in human relations. It was led by Ken Benny, who was one of the leading people in the country for group dynamics, T groups, sensitivity groups. He was one of the co-founders of the National Training Lab. The theme of the pro-seminar was the functions of social conflict. Frankly, I didn't really appreciate the course at the time, but I have to tell you that after a lifetime, well over 50 years of pastoral counseling with families, dealing with issues in families, a good number of years as a corporate dude. There's a lot of conflict in the workplace, too. I found what I learned in that course was tremendously helpful in helping families to improve relationships, in helping to reduce conflict in the workplace. What I learned in that course is that conflict, while that's scary and people tend to draw back from conflict, if you address conflict, if you deal with it, it can lead to stronger bonds. You can have a better relationship if you can resolve a conflict with a family member or with a colleague. I learned that it's more difficult in the family. There's so much more at stake. You're so close. And very often there's conflict, and you know what happens. People withdraw. They don't want to go to the Thanksgiving dinner. They don't want to be part of Christmas, and it upsets everybody. There's a whole system of messiness that's not very pleasing. But what I learned is if you will address conflict, address a problem relationship in your family, you'll have a stronger bond than ever. Now, Anna didn't leave me in the lurch. She said, John, there's a lot of messiness families in the Old Testament. And sure enough, I went looking in Genesis, because she preached in Genesis last week, a very fine sermon on dealing with secrets. And I came across a story that I know very well, the story of Jacob and Esau. If you're not sure what to read this afternoon, read the Jacob stories. They're very compelling. They were not the best of brothers. They were the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. They were twins, but there was the promise of trouble when they were born even. Esau came out of the womb first. Jacob came out grabbing onto the foot of Esau. I won't go through all the stories, but know that they had problems. Esau was a hunter, loved to get game and prepare game for his father. Jacob was a homebody. One day, Jacob came in famished from a hunt, smelled a stew that Jacob had been preparing, said, wow, that smells good, and I'm famished. And Jacob said, give me your birthright, and I'll give you some stew. And Esau said, birthright? I'm hungry. What's a birthright? So I swear. And he gave his birthright to Esau. And then later on, it turns out that Isaac favored Esau, and Rebekah favored Jacob. And Rebekah and Jacob pulled off the most imaginative con in the whole Bible. I mean, it is interesting to read how they deceived Isaac and got him to give his blessing not to the oldest, Esau, but to Jacob. When Jacob heard about it, he said, I'm going to kill him. And Rebekah said to Jacob, maybe you ought to get out of town. Go to my brother Laban. And that's a whole other story where the deceiver, Jacob, gets deceived. But it so often happens even in troubled families where relationships are a problem. There's a wish to go home. Even if many of you have read the book Educated, it amazes me that Tara Westhover, the author, with all she went through as a child, still makes her way back home. Jacob did some prayer, and he decided he wanted to go home. He wanted to make things right with Esau. So he sent messengers, and the messengers went and said, on behalf of Jacob, I have many oxen and donkeys, and I want to come and make things right between us. The early news back wasn't very encouraging. He heard that Esau was recruiting 400 men. Jacob prayed, and he stayed with it. Now picture this scene. It's a desert scene for sure. It's the closest we have in the Bible to gunfight at the OK Corral, or sword fight at the OK Corral, although this week I entertained the staff. I'm not the world's greatest typist, but I sent our admin, Annette, my title for today's sermon. And I gave her as a title, A Kill to Build a Dream. Actually, you can see I wanted to use the old jazz standard, a kiss to build a dream on. And so here's Jacob moving toward Esau, and he's very humble. He bows 7 times. And there's Esau, 400 armed men making their way toward Jacob and his family. What a moment. And Esau runs to his brother, embraces him, kisses him, and they wept together. And there was reconciliation. Some people nitpick and say, well, what about the end of the chapter? They separated. You'd be really nitpicking. They had resolved their problems. They had found a new relationship. And if you read a couple of chapters more, in chapter 35 of Genesis, they are together and they bury their father Isaac together. Well, what can we learn from Jacob? Prayer. Intention. I'm going to be the one to take the initiative. Courage to stay with it. Humility. I own some of the problems in this relationship. And the result was reconciliation and a new bond. In our family 15 years ago, we had a very sad time. My brother's daughter, Kristen, died, 34 years old. The memorial service was at First Congregational Church in Natick. It was a wonderful service. After the service, it occurred to me that while we had invited many family, I had forgotten to invite my brother Donnie, and my cousin Donnie, and his wife Janet. I can't tell you how bad I felt about that. And I went several days. And then one day, sitting in my office at First Congregational Church, I picked up the phone, took initiative, had some intention, and I called Donnie. And I told him what had happened. I apologized. I said I was sorry. And I said, now I hope you're not going to do the family thing and not speak to me for 5 years. There was a long pause. And Donnie said, it was 10 years. And we had a good laugh over it, and there was reconciliation and healing. Donnie died not long after that, colon cancer. He suffered a great deal, actually. Shirley and I went to see him a couple of days before he died. He held my hand, and he said, I hope you'll say a prayer for me at my service. I said a lot more than a prayer. Every family has relationship issues. Every family has some conflict. Every family seems to have one person who withdraws, hurt for one reason or another. Somebody's got to take initiative. Somebody's got to be the one to say, I want this situation to heal. So it's intention. It's courage. It's humility. I own some. That's really hard because when you think about conflict and you think about the other person's hurt, what about me? I'm hurt. But if you can be humble, you don't have to bow down 7 times. But that's the way to find healing in a family. So this morning, think about your family. Are there some relationships that aren't working too well? Have you found yourself in a little bit of problem going home for Thanksgiving? Intention. courage, humility, reconciliation, and the bond will be even stronger than it was. Now, it's Jazz Sunday. And why do we have a Jazz Sunday? Because jazz moves the spirit. It has energy. And I wanted to close with a Louis Armstrong special. He always was asked to play that thing that was so wonderful for him. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. Some kids used to say to him, yeah, well, what about all the wars and the torture? And he'd say, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. And another favorite of his was the sunny side of the street. After all he'd been through, he had that big grin. He included it in his iconic town hall concert of 1947. It begins this way. Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street.
Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Pitter-pat and the happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with those blues on parade, but I'm not afraid. This rover crossed over. I'll never have a cent. I'll be rich as Rockefeller. Gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street. If I never have a cent, I'll be rich as Rockefeller. Gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street.